but the data is clear. People on the left are much likelier to defend and celebrate political violence.
JD Vance lied today on the Charlie Kirk show when he said the statistics are clear.
Hey guys, welcome back to another video. We've got to talk about this breaking story that has people very up in arms because Vice President JD Vance just hosted a special episode of the Charlie Kirk podcast, and he called out the problem of political violence and advanced the argument that it is not exclusively, but is primarily a problem supported by people left of center in America. Here's the clip of him saying that, and then we'll go over some of the extreme backlash and pushback he's getting and what does the data actually say. Listen to this clip.
I really do believe that we can come together in this country. I believe we must. But unity, real unity, can be found only after climbing the mountain of truth. And there are difficult truths we must confront in our country. One truth is that 24% of self-described, quote, very liberals believe it is acceptable to be happy about the death of a political opponent, while only 3% of self-described very conservatives agree. 3% is too many, of course. Another truth is that 26% of young liberals believe political violence is sometimes justified, and only 7% of young conservatives say the same. Again, too high a number. In a country of 330 million people, you can of course find one person of a given political persuasion justifying this or that or almost anything, but the data is clear. People on the left are much likelier to defend and celebrate political violence. This is not a both sides problem. If both sides have a problem, one side has a much bigger and malignant problem, and that is the truth we must be told. That problem has terrible consequences. The leader of our party, Donald J. Trump, escaped an assassin's bullet by less than an inch. Our House Majority Leader, Stephen Scalise, came within seconds of death by an assassin himself. And now, the most influential conservative activist in generations, our friend Charlie, has been murdered. This violence, it doesn't come from nowhere.
So when I first saw this clip, which is just going mega viral, I had an interesting reaction to it because it just, I'm going to be honest, I've been critical of JD in the past. I certainly don't agree with him on a whole host of things, but this rang true to me. When I think of TikTok and the people cheering, somebody just do it, or sad that the bullet missed when it comes to Trump, or when I think of the unhinged, insane cult around alleged murderer Luigi Mangione, where people support him killing a healthcare CEO in cold blood in extrajudicial fashion, I don't see an equivalent to that on the right. I just don't. Of course, there were people on the right who mocked Paul Pelosi's husband being brutally assaulted. I think that's horrific. There are people on the right, this administration, Trump and JD Vance, pardoned violent January 6 rioters who assaulted cops. I totally disagree with that. I called it out at the time. But I think this is true, directionally at least. I mean, I absolutely think there's political violence on both sides. But in terms of which base of voters, of Americans, is generally more supportive of it, JD Vance's allegation is that it's more of a left of center widespread issue than a right of center widespread issue. I think that's probably true. And so when he said this, it resonated with me and with millions of other people. But very quickly, people started to deny this and say, that's not true. How dare you? That's a lie. That's a lie. That's the language that they used. One of those people was the left-wing journalist and commentator Mehdi Hasan, who he tweeted about this and then spoke about it on News Nation last night. Here's the clip of him pushing back on JD Vance.
JD Vance lied today on the Charlie Kirk show when he said the statistics are clear, that this is a left-wing problem. It's the exact reverse. right? Exact reverse. You look at the ADL Center for Extremism, which looked at 444 people killed by extremists between 2013 and 2022, 75% of them by the right. You look at the University of Maryland study that was done for their terrorism center, which found that from 1948 to 2018, right-wing extremists more likely to carry out violence than left-wing extremists. You look at the head of the FBI, who Donald Trump appointed, Chris Wray, who said the number one domestic terror threat in this country comes from religious and racially motivated extremists, specifically white supremacists. You can keep going. The National Institute for Justice found that the majority of incidents since 1990, violent terroristic acts were right-wing extremists. The single biggest day of political violence, Chris, in our lifetimes in this country was January 6th, 2021, when right-wing extremists attacked the Capitol, injured police officers. They were ideologically motivated. You and I agreed it was an insurrection at the time. So it's bizarre for Vance to go on TV or go online and say the exact opposite of what both the official statistics say and the think tanks say. All of our evidence tells us. I mean, there was a Democratic lawmaker, Chris, I don't know how many times we have to say this, who was murdered in her home with her husband in June by a Trump supporter. And Donald Trump today said, who? When he was asked about it, he said, who?
Wow. So I feel like he totally missed the point. Am I crazy, or did he totally miss the point? So he's saying that what JD Vance said is wrong because when you look at the actual statistics about acts of political violence, the majority of it comes from the far right, not the far left. But that's literally non-responsive. That's not what JD Vance was talking about. First off, I'm going to be honest with you. I've looked at some of those statistics a little bit, and I doubt their veracity. Some of those groups, like the ADL, the way they calculate those things are suspect. And we could do a whole deep dive into that. But let's take it at face value and say that that is true, that maybe a majority of the instances where political violence has been committed in recent years have come from the far right. That's not what JD was talking about. That's bad, but we're still only talking about a handful of people, extremists on either side, that aren't, doesn't tell us much about the masses. What JD said was that there's more support for it among the left of center base in America. And that's a falsifiable proposition. If you've got data, you've got polling that suggests that's not true, show it to us. But I'm just surprised because I disagree with him on most things. But Mehdi Hasan is like a smart guy. He's a very famous journalist and left-wing critic. He seemed to not get the point at all. And it seems like we're talking past each other here. Because what JD Vance actually said does appear to be borne out by some polling that I found. So we're going to look at some YouGov polling, which is one of the premier pollers in America. They found that most Americans say it's unacceptable to be happy about public figures' deaths, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to call it acceptable. They also found that most Americans across the political spectrum say that political violence is never justified, but younger and more liberal Americans are more likely to disagree. So here are some of those stats. Younger and more liberal Americans are more likely than older or more conservative Americans to say political violence can sometimes be justified, but this remains a minority opinion among those groups. Among the very liberal, 25% say political violence can sometimes be justified, and 55% say it can't. Among adults under 30, 19% say it can be justified, and 51% say it can't. So this is the data that's actually germane to what JD Vance was talking about, and it seems to back up what he's saying. It seems that what he's saying is true, and that when you have people on either side that support violence, that is a more common belief, statistically speaking, with left-wing people and with young people than it is with right-wing people and older people. That confirms my prior expectations and kind of everything I have encountered when talking to people across the political spectrum and monitoring political discourse over the last several years. We've also talked about this before. There is a real rise of assassination culture, as researchers have called it, on the left. So when we look at data from, for example, the Network Contagion Institute and Rutgers University, we see disturbing levels of Democrats or left of center Americans say that the assassination of Donald Trump or Elon Musk could be partially justified. I don't see equivalent polling on the right. Maybe it exists, but people haven't presented it. And in the absence of that, and looking at this evidence, it seems true to me what JD Vance said. Now, you could respond to it by saying, well, it's still most liberals don't support this, and that's true, and that's great, and I appreciate that. I very much appreciated the way that most mainstream Democrats have come out and condemned the horrific killing of Charlie Kirk. You could also say, well, Republicans are hypocritical because they make excuses for X, Y, and Z, and that might be true. But I feel like they are just denying reality and truth and just kind of gaslighting us. Like that Mehdi Hasan clip feels gaslighty because he's just saying that JD Vance is lying and then talking about something totally different. Denial is not a strategy, or as I more regularly say, Delulu is not a Salulu. But after JD Vance dropped this truth bomb in this viral clip, a lot of people seem to be in just denial mode. And I find that unfortunate because we're not going to be, and JD in the full interview, which I watched, or the full episode or speech, he talked about uniting with the people on the left, his many Democratic friends and colleagues who've come out forcefully against this. He's just saying we can't have unity with people who support political terrorism. And I agree with that. And he then says that that attitude is more common on the left now than the right these days. And I think that's also true. And if you don't, you've got to actually address the points, not just scream and rage and enter full denial. What do you guys think? Do you agree with what Vice President Vance had to say? Let me know in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet for more breaking news updates and viral videos. Remember to check out my podcast as well, the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show on internet insanity, media fails, and political craziness. You can subscribe to that on all the different podcast platforms in the link in the description. And with that, guys, we'll talk again real soon.